Hello, this is the Vietnam Social News Update for September 30th, 2025. Date of news coverage, September 30th, 2025. Politics. Vietnam's top leader, Party General Secretary To Lum, is expected to make a rare visit to North Korea in October. If confirmed, it would be the first trip by a Vietnamese party chief to Pyongyang in nearly 2 decades, underscoring Hanoi's long-standing ties with the DPRK, even as practical economic links remain minimal. The prospective visit fits Vietnam's habit of careful, multi-directional diplomacy, engaging all sides on the Korean peninsula while keeping its own strategic autonomy front and center. At home, the government's drive to streamline the state apparatus continues to shape policy debates. Leaders emphasize that cutting red tape and consolidating overlapping functions should improve public services and reduce costs. The message to investors and citizens alike is that a leaner state can still deliver, provided core functions, from licensing to public security and disaster response, remain responsive and transparent. The coming weeks will be a test of that promise, as ministries translate broad reform goals into day-to-day procedures. Economy. Now let's move to the economy. Vietnam is navigating powerful external headwinds after the United States imposed new tariffs in August. UN estimates suggest the duties could shave as much as $25 billion from Vietnamese exports to the U.S., nearly a fifth of last year's total, if fully felt across the supply chain. Sectors like footwear and apparel are particularly exposed because of deep ties to U.S. consumers and heavy reliance on imported inputs. The immediate challenge is to protect jobs and orders while guarding against a slide in business confidence. Hanoi's response is two-pronged. First, keep talking to Washington on rules of origin and intellectual property to reduce friction for compliant manufacturers. Second, diversify markets at speed. The Prime Minister says Vietnam aims to conclude free trade deals with Mercosur in Latin America and the Gulf Cooperation Council by year-end, while continuing to court investment from Korea, Japan, and Europe. Despite the tariff shock, export data through mid-September show shipments up roughly 16% year-on-year to about $325 billion, and the government is still targeting full-year growth above 12%. Even so, global lenders have trimmed Vietnam's 2025 growth outlook as they await clearer evidence that new markets can offset U.S. headwinds. Aviation is one bright spot. Vietjet has begun taking long-delayed aircraft deliveries to expand its regional network, while newcomer Sun Phu Quoc Airways targets a November 1st launch, linking Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, Da Nang, and tourist hubs centered on Phu Quoc. Fleet expansion and new routes signal that carriers are betting on sustained tourism and business travel, even as near-term weather disruptions complicate operations. Next, in society and culture, the big story today is the weather. The remnants of Typhoon Bualoy have unleashed torrential rains across northern and north-central Vietnam, with officials reporting at least 19 fatalities and more than a dozen people still missing as of this morning. Over 100,000 homes have suffered damage. Floods and landslides have cut power in pockets of Nha An and Ha Tin, and authorities warn that saturated hillsides may continue to give way. In Hanoi, hours of downpours turned commutes into ordeals, with vehicles stranded on waterlogged arteries and emergency crews working through the night to clear drains and reach those trapped by rising waters. The human stories stand out. Families evacuated by boat, shopkeepers racing to lift inventory above floodlines, and volunteers ferrying food to isolated neighborhoods. Local governments have mobilized soldiers, police, and youth unions to assist with evacuations and restore basic services. With river levels still high and more rain possible, residents in low-lying areas are urged to stay alert to official guidance and avoid travel through inundated streets. Culturally, the Mid-Autumn Festival is just a week away, falling on October 6th this year. Lantern streets in Ho Chi Minh City and craft alleys in Hanoi have been bustling in recent days as families prepare mooncakes and children pick out star-shaped lanterns. Still, this week storms are forcing adjustments. some outdoor events may shift schedules or move indoors. Communities are keeping the spirit alive by organizing schoolyard lion dances and neighborhood lantern parades once the weather clears, turning the holiday into a small sign of normalcy after days of hardship. International relations. Finally, in international relations, Europe is turning the spotlight on trade symmetry. During a visit to Hanoi late last week, the EU's trade chief called for more balanced flows under the EU-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement, noting that Vietnamese exports to Europe have surged since 2020, while EU sales into Vietnam have grown far more modestly. Brussels wants easier market access, particularly for farm goods and pharmaceuticals, through streamlined approvals and alignment with international standards in areas like autos. For Vietnam, this is an opportunity to broaden supply chains and reduce over-reliance on any single market, provided regulatory convergence doesn't burden smaller firms. Regional security remains tense. Clashes at sea between China and the Philippines have intensified around disputed shoals, keeping South China Sea risks on policymakers' minds in Hanoi. Vietnam's approach is to speak softly but stand firm, lodging diplomatic notes when lines are crossed, strengthening Coast Guard capacity, and deepening ties with partners ranging from the US and Japan to Australia and India. The potential October trip to Pyongyang underscores that same balancing act. Maintain ideological friendships, engage rivals and partners alike, and keep the focus on stability that underpins trade and growth. As always, the through line is resilience. Whether in disaster response, trade diversification, or quiet diplomacy, Vietnam is trying to absorb shocks and keep moving. Bamboo bending in the wind, then springing back. Thank you for listening to the Vietnam Social News Update. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And see you again tomorrow. This news summary is based on publicly available reports and rewritten uniquely for Vietnam social news. VietnamNews.com is the official web address of Vietnam Social News. We are an independent platform, not affiliated with Vietnam News Agency or any government-owned media outlet.